Welcome, Katindi. Welcome our attendees. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent, excellent. It's so nice to have you again. Dr. Katindi Sivinjonjo. I will never stop calling, giggling when I say that.
Yeah.
But welcome. Thank you for coming to this session again. Yeah. And thank you for our attendees who are with us today for this, our inaugural session. I call it inaugural, but it's actually not quite so. This is part of a long continuing process in terms of the scenarios and the Youth Africa Youth Factbook. And maybe I could just take the turn to say what it is about, then I'll let you introduce yourself and then you can pick it from there. I just want to, as much as I'm listed as moderator, and my name is Lloyd Wamai from the Africa Alliance of MCAs, as much as I'm listed as a moderator, I'm an eternal student and right now a student of Dr. Katindi. So this is a process which we started, I think, way back in 2016 with collection of data for what we are calling the Africa Youth Factbook, which is basically an assessment of trends that affect young people mostly, or can I say mostly, but anchored a lot on the African Union's Agenda 2063. Mm-hmm. So we started that process by collecting a lot of data and having conversations with youth leaders, and we had a questionnaire which we put out, and we had a whole other process where we validated and put out the Africa Youth Factbook. So when you start to speak, Dr. Katindi, please, I would invite you also to mention a bit about it. But this is part of that conversation, and I'm very happy to everyone for everyone who was able to join us. Just a bit of what can I say? Logistics. If anyone has any questions they would like to raise or compliments, complaints, please feel free to use the chat room at the bottom of the page and the Q&A at the bottom of the page. Also at the bottom of the Zoom page, I call it a page, and we will be happy to answer. But Dr. Katindi, we don't have much time. We just want to keep it for 1 hour for this session. So if you could just start with a small introduction of yourself and the whole process, and then we can pick it from there. Over to you.
Okay. All right, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name, as you've been told, is Dr. Katindi. I facilitated the Futures process, and I'm an African futurist. I actually work with Longview Consult, which is a consultancy firm I started where we do research and policy analysis. And of course, we use what we call futures methodologies that I will sort of like maybe introduce you to before we begin. But basically, what can I say about myself? It's easier, Lloyd, if you had introduced me.
You can still do that.
Yeah, but apart from that, I write a lot. I am actually beginning a program where I'll be teaching with a global partner where we are calling ourselves Teach the Future. So the global partner is called Teach the Future. I am Longview, but I'll be doing this under Longview Futures Foundation. And the idea is to get as many young people to understand foresight as a mindset they need for the future of, basically for the future. And I think that is important even given the kind of crisis we are beginning to see and some of the discussions that we are going to have today. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Again, to say, just to emphasize that this is the first of a process of meetings that we want to have over the internet to discuss what came out of the Africa Youth Factbook and to discuss the scenarios as one of the products of the Africa Youth Factbook. I think you'll mention a bit what we mean by the scenarios.
Mm.
So this is basically an introduction of the trends and the data, to the trends and the data and the process that we went through. But we also have thematic sessions that we will have as we continue, and we'll be putting them out. So we would like to build as much engagement as possible. And we also have a session in French, English today and French tomorrow, and every other session will be day 1 English and day 2 French, just for everyone to know. But Katingi, maybe you could start by the beginning.
Yeah.
Maybe if you could speak a little bit about the fact book, a little bit about what you discovered as leading in that process, and
Yeah.
then we could take it from there.
Okay. Sawa. So just if I could just show you what the cover looks like. It's actually online. If you would like to look for it, I believe, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it is online. Can you see the screen?
Yes, yes, can see the screen.
Okay. So this is the Youth Fact Book, and it basically puts it. So we started the process by doing a primary data collection where we were asking young people what they see happening in the future, what they would like to identify with, where they would prefer to work, and basically what they see as the issues in Africa. And so we talked to about 1,000 young people, and we presented the data in this fact book. But the second thing we did in the fact book is to try and collect data that has been collected by other organizations to try and see where is Africa headed in the next maybe 40, 50 years at the time when we were doing this work. So up to 2063. So the data presented in this book basically looks at data from 2010 to 2060 actually. And it is very interesting to just then compare this and to look at it with the eyes of a COVID-19 situation. And that's the reason why we are doing this work, to just question a bit of the data. There's an article I have written in my blog called Why We Should Consume Forecasts with Caution. Now, what happens with data projection is that you take what was happening, the trends that were happening. So for example, if urbanization is rising, then it is assumed that that trend will continue in the future, right? And so we keep projecting, so how much more will it rise? But now the reason we are having this presentation is even to question those projections on the basis of, like I said, the COVID-19 situation, to see, is that really the case? Or what other scenarios or futures present themselves as a result of disruption? Yeah.
Okay. I like that you use the word disruption. I mean,
Yeah.
COVID-19 has been, I think, the world's biggest distraction to date.
Yeah. Yeah.
In your experience, maybe we can take it from there. I remember in the fact book, we had conversations around health, education,
Yeah.
technology, and employment. In your
Mhm.
experience so far, maybe you
Yeah.
could speak a little bit to the COVID-19 disruption.
Situation. Okay,
Yeah.
I have actually prepared a presentation. If you would allow me to make that presentation, then we can come back and discuss some of the issues that you begin to see as of concern. So the first
Yes.
slide, so I just start from the basics. Can you see it well, or do you need a full screen?
I can see it well myself, but anybody who would need something different, any one of the attendees, please feel free to put it in the chat. But I'm okay.
Yeah, okay, so so basically, as we consume this presentation, I want us to think about what is futures thinking. It is basically thinking about beyond today. And it's not tomorrow or the next 1 month, it's really thinking about very long-term future. And that process is what is called foresight thinking, foresight analysis, or futures thinking, right? The idea for it is to keep asking yourself, what strategic decisions can I make now that will help me, in a sense, face the future I would like to see, and maybe avert the future that I don't want to see, okay? Then I think—
Just a quick question, sorry, someone
yes,
is requesting if you could put it on
we do
slideshow.
full, okay, Sawa.
Yeah.
So basically, the other thing that we want to process in this presentation is the fact that crisis is not new, okay? It just perhaps is what the issue is then is the magnitude and maybe the fact that it is happening much more frequently. So if you process, we've gone through Ebola, we've gone through SARS, we've gone through an oil crisis. Now we are going through COVID-19. We've gone through the issues in the US with the Black Lives Matter. We've gone through environmental crisis. 2008, we went through a financial crisis. So the point about crisis is very interesting, and how human beings process crisis is that when it is far off, like when it's in Southeast Asia, like the tsunami, we don't feel the urgency to act, right? It's when a crisis comes closer to us, then we begin to fumble about what are the answers. And in Africa in particular, we are very bad at preparedness. And what this crisis is beginning to tell us is that all these things are interconnected. They are so close to us, and we will need to process crisis and become more prepared as a result. So what is the impact of COVID-19? What does the future of Africa look like? And I'm going to keep jumping back and forth from the Youth Factbook and from some of the data that is coming out as a result of COVID-19. I'm aware that some of the participants are not from Eastern Africa. I'm sorry, because a lot of the data I've been able to process over time is really from Eastern Africa. But I want you to think about the situation of COVID-19 from your point of view, if you're not from the countries that I'm going to be mentioning. But so by the time we were reaching 100 days, you can see Kenya was really, really accelerating. Sudan had accelerated, but started to plateau. Ethiopia, the same. Djibouti, Somalia, South Sudan, Uganda. This issue about Tanzania, the issue here is it because of the fact that the country was declared COVID-free? And so maybe there wasn't enough data coming out of the country to help us see the true nature of. But the Tanzanians in the group can tell us. But basically, you can see that at least in the Eastern African region, you can see that we've been rising. And as of today, we have about 30,000. These are health numbers from Kenya. And the basic message here is that when we look at our own medical, whether it's professionals vis-a-vis the density of the population, you realize that we have a very small capacity to take care of any health crisis that could happen. And so in Kenya, for example, we have started one of the interventions is home-based care, so that we try and, because some of the hospitals are full to capacity, because when we reopened, the number of cases really soared up. Now, I think we opened up without fully processing, and I suspect that that's everywhere in Africa, without fully processing the implications of reopening. And the interesting thing is that we reopened despite the fact that other countries that had opened closed very quickly because the numbers completely soared. So one would want to ask then, what was, even if you don't, we already opened, but what does that mean for us moving forward, right? And there's been people who've been doing, of course, data analysis from past crises like these ones, and processing even the data on this one. And they say that the problem with this disease is that it's viral. And how it is going is that because first of all of reopening, then you definitely face what we are calling a massive surge, or the monster wave. And so there'll be plateaus and waves. And one of the things that we need to process as Africa is that it might be here to stay in the long term. I know a lot of people keep saying when coronavirus ends, but maybe we should come to terms with the fact that it is not ending. It might just stay with us for the long haul. And like HIV, then how do you strategize on how to live alongside this kind of pandemic, so to speak, okay? It becomes a persistent crisis, a recurring crisis, and depending on the management, the waves could be much more tumultuous than others. Now, then having processed that it's a long-term issue, we need to ask ourselves, are we going to be decisive about flattening the curve? And what long-term measures do we put in place to be able to live with COVID, right? And data is basically saying that COVID-19 will not end until 60% to 70% of the population is immune. Okay, so how do we get to that immunity? The other thing is that long-term thinking helps us to make decisions, improve our decision-making processes. I just put this together because usually before we opened, we should have made a tick on all these issues. We should have asked ourselves, do we have the capacity, the health system capacity to handle large numbers? In Kenya, definitely. And I suspect most of Africa, that's the same case. The other issue is this one about sufficient rapid random testing. A lot of us, first of all, we've been relying on kits from outside, and even then we are stealing them. Okay, so because of corruption, and so that has delayed, of course, because of the stealing and all that corruption. The fact that we don't even have the capacity to make our own kits and to do our own tests sufficiently, then we cannot perform this in a quick way to be able to understand how to quickly contain the situation. The other issue that we didn't do very well is contact tracing. So in Kenya, for example, people would get infected or tested and then give the wrong number, the wrong mobile number, so that you cannot trace them where they are. And so the other number of the people they come into contact with become a risk as well. So the risk is multiplied, okay? So that is what happens when you have a failed system. Institutes cultural and infrastructural social distancing changes. Now, as Africans, we have what we call we have what we call a high distance power, but we have a very communal society. So social distancing is not so much in our culture. And so how do you really bring people to the understanding that it is for their safety and good to sort of like keep away from each other, keep that social distance, not visit, and not minimize that issue of contact, okay? And I think there's a big issue here, a big discussion here to be held, because there are also issues of trust. When in Kenya, for example, when I've talked to different people, they keep telling us that, oh, is there corona really? How come it's certain people that get it? Do you know anyone who knows anyone who knows anyone who knows anyone who has tested positive? So that lack of trust on official data or official information is also fatalistic. In case this is true, not that I'm doubting it is, but the point I'm trying to make is that what do you do when there are such low levels of trust about what is going on? And then, of course, you need data. You need to be able to surveil the data so that you can strategize. But the one thing about our data capacity, it's also very low. And it's other entities, other governments like the US CDC that are creating. Okay, my thing is refusing to move. Yeah, and the other thing you want to do is change management. So you want to ask yourself in the long term, how are the things that we are having to do now affect us in the future? A lot of us, because of not making connections, normally don't combine or don't really, we remove this situation from other situations. What I mean is social distancing has its implications on our life in the future, right? It has changed, for example, the way weddings and funerals are held. So that, for example, weddings used to have 500 people because it's a celebration. But now the law requires that you have about only 15 people or thereabout, or 100 at most. So how will that affect us in the future? Okay, how will that affect our social relationships in the future? Are we having those conversations? Because then by 2063, the question becomes, these seeds that are being planted now, or these things that we are seeing now, in their full-blown capacity, which will be in the 2060s, 2040s, how will they look like? So what does surveillance mean for our right to privacy? When we are told that we need to contact trace, we need to make sure that you open up so that we are able to be precise about our data collection on COVID. Is this a potential issue to be used for us to be denied our right to privacy in the future, right? This issue about digitization of things, okay? We've been told kids can't go to school. Now there's online learning. First of all, that has its issues, inequalities, and so forth. But are we processing what that means? Digitization of things means for governance, education, health. It doesn't have to be a bad thing, but what are the opportunities that also lie there? Okay, or what are the disadvantages that lie there? Because again, we need to be aware of the fact that a lot of this digitization of things, for example, is being done by big tech. Is that the next frontier of quote unquote Africa's colonization? And can we do anything about it? Now, and I think in the scenarios we painted, there was an issue about the new colonization being digital, okay? Or debt for that matter. Now, in the Youth Fact Book, part of the data that we had collected was that 86% of the youth we talked to, the 1,000 that I said earlier, were feeling optimistic about their value in society, mainly because of their potential. One would want to go back and say, what has COVID done in terms of that optimism? Okay? When we asked about what people fear most, they talked about failure, poverty, death, and terminal illness. I think COVID has brought all four in one package, right? So it means that the things that people are most fearful about is happening much faster than we thought, all right? And then you want to ask yourself, what is happening? How is COVID affecting these things? So let's process some COVID data here on the economy. On the economy, I think there's been projections saying that at least by the end of the year, South Africa and Nigeria, those are the biggest economies in Africa, will grow. Economic growth will decline by a third. Remember, for the longest time, okay, even as soon as January, we're saying that Africa is growing. It is the continent that is having the most economic growth. Of course, there are arguments about whose growth is that. Does it reduce poverty, etc., right? But now we moved, and every country, Kenya included, Kenya had projected, at least World Bank had projected, a 6% growth. Now they are saying that a third of these economies, 8% plus, that's the decline of the economies, right? Then domestic policies are causing most of the economic costs. So of course, trade restrictions, things about production, companies closing down, etc., right? And there is talk of food supply chains are exposed, and the agri-food system is likely to contract. Again, we need to process what that means, okay? In terms of livelihood, it was projected that Africa was going to have the highest drop, the highest increase, in poverty. So this is world population. If I could just look at, this is world population, this is total population, and they were saying that there's going to be an increase in poverty of about 23%, and the hardest hit would actually be the urban areas, and that rural areas in Africa poverty was going to increase by 15%. One would want to ask why rural areas and not urban areas. At the time this conversation was being held, first of all, rural areas are much more resilient than urban areas. And what tends to happen in rural areas is that, first of all, you're not paying rent, you're most likely growing your own food. And even if there's not a lot of money circulating, let's say even at $20 can stay for far much longer than it can stay in the urban area because of the modern economy and the expenses that are there. So with a lot of people losing jobs in the urban areas, it's more likely that the distress would come faster in urban areas than in rural areas. Now let's look at what, this is data from Kenya. And when you look at, yes, we are digitizing education. So we just had a quick look at how many homes have televisions. And totally, it's less than half 50%. Radio, at least, is 57%. So that means if you do any learning program on radio, 43% of those students are going to actually, about 43% of students are going to be not to miss out, right? If you do anything through television, about 60%. Now, you need the internet to be able to do some of what is being recommended. That means about 82% of households and 91% Again, because they may have internet for the phone, but not for a laptop. A lot of the programs are also very laptop friendly, but maybe not mobile friendly. Okay. So I hope that as I'm talking for young people, you're beginning to see opportunities like in the learning bit, where how can we reduce the cost of data? Can we produce learning material for phones? Because Africa has the highest rising number of phone access to phones. I know there are gender disparities and so forth, but what can we do with what we have? Now, when we asked young people where they would want to live and where they would want to work, a lot of them said they want to be in formal employment, and a lot of them said they wanted to be in flexible employment. And then the current occupations that they had vis-a-vis the future aspirational uh, occupations, most of them wanted to be in the future in technology, to work with NGOs and to work with education. And I think I like this a lot because then young people already have a cue even from before where the opportunities are. Definitely you can see in technology, definitely in education, definitely in agriculture from the earlier slide where we said issues around contracting food chain systems and so forth, availability of food. So there's an opportunity there because people have to eat. Then there is, so how do you, for the young person, I would ask, what are the opportunities that you can leverage on with bearing in mind that there's COVID-19, okay? Of course, then there's the issue about health is another big opportunity. And that to me gives me hope because it's very clear that young people can see where the opportunities are. But now let's process this statistic here where you have most of them want to be in formal employment and most of them want to be in have flexible time and to have a job that has flexible time and place. But when we look at the COVID sort of like effect on things, you see manufacturing, this is in Kenya, manufacturing will decline by 231,000 jobs. No, actually, yeah, 2 million. This is 2 million jobs, right? Construction by about 293,000. This one, wholesale and retail, which is where most people are. And if you think about where young people are mostly based also, retail, because this is where a lot of the informal sector is in, 6 or to 7 million jobs will be lost. And I want you to prorate this to your countries, right? Community and social infrastructure, like, NGOs and so forth, they'll lose another 1 million jobs. And so basically we are saying a huge part of the economy is going to decline for most countries, okay? Then this is just by numbers, but let me skip that and come to a place like China. And in China, they're talking about the SMEs and the collapse of SMEs because SMEs are what have built the Chinese economy. So because of COVID, almost 100% of them had to close, right? Quarantine measures and so forth. And so they lost 90% of employment, 80% of export because their biggest export market was in Africa. They lost 70% of GDP and they lost 60% of revenue. So China was really affected by this. But if you think about that, China accounted for 19% of GDP growth. In 2019, and China's SMEs contributed quite a lot to worldwide GDP. So this effect obviously has a knock-on effect on the global, but also on countries themselves. And it cascades down to you as a young person who got goods and services from China to be able to do wholesale and retail, which we have seen will lose about 7 million jobs, at least in Kenya, right? So, so by February, 80% of SMEs had not resumed production and the direct cost of shutting down was so much money, okay? And so if you look at that and just try and think about it in terms of our own countries, I think you can see that the effect will be devastating. Now, the other thing about that was very interesting is that a lot of people, it was projected that a lot of people to 2060 will be moving to urban areas, but COVID has actually had the opposite effect. that it has, because the rural areas is where there's more resilience, a lot more people have moved to the rural areas. At least when Kenya opened up, there was a massive drove into, rather than continue paying rent with money that you don't have, you better just go and squat somewhere in a village and try and make do there. And so Africa is experiencing, yes, the data was saying it's experiencing the highest urban growth. It would be interesting to see how that has been affected by COVID-19. So what are the implications of urbanizations? And one of the things we want to do is to use this situation to see, are these things still the case? Increased migration movement of working age people from rural areas to urban centers. Now they say it will be instrumental in accelerating economic growth, but the opposite. Actually, I was talking to someone yesterday who sells grain and legume, and they were saying that because of COVID and because of people moving to urban areas, they sold much more grain than they have sold in so long. Okay, so and then etc. Now I'm just about to finish. Let's look at the issues around health. I want you to just pay attention to these communicable diseases. This is 2060. This is I think it was 2010 or 2015, the dark blue one. Okay. You can see that because of the kind of policies and efforts that have been put in our countries, we managed to begin to reduce a lot of these communicable and infectious diseases like HIV, malaria, other infectious and parasitic diseases, respiratory infections. But I think COVID is going to have the opposite effect, okay? And then maternal conditions, again, I don't know about your countries, but in Kenya, there was such a huge surge of teenage pregnancies. So again, and of course that has implications, particularly when very young girls get pregnant. Of course, there are those maternal conditions and perinatal conditions that become a big issue. Okay, of course, I believe the nutritional deficiencies will increase rather than decrease. Again, because of these young people they're having these unplanned pregnancies. You've seen what the situation is like with loss of jobs. And so obviously that will exacerbate and the agricultural value chain. So that will exacerbate nutritional deficiencies. Now, again, when you think about our health systems, I'm careful to say that because I haven't done a careful study of other African countries, I suspect it is the same trend, but in Kenya, we've stopped paying attention to these things that have been growing. So the cardiovascular diseases and so forth, those have been on the rise, or rather they are predicted to rise, to almost double by 2016 neuropsychiatric disorders, mental illness. So of course, mental illness, because of the stresses people are going through, we've seen bigger numbers of suicide cases, but we've also seen, so that may continue, but this one, we've neglected all this and we are now trying to fight COVID. So the question becomes, if these are being reversed, right, infectious diseases, and again, this might surge because of the kids are idle, maybe they're engaging in risky sexual behavior, they're not in school, so that might come back, right? And it will actually surge at some point. So what do all these health indicators mean in a few years from today? And yet our countries are not even putting the required amount of resources into health, right? And a lot of our health systems, again, rely on donor funding. Donors are now reducing their funding because they're fighting their own crisis. And I want you to project that and see how else will we finance that kind of scenario that I have painted with the data. Let me not go into this, but this is the unwanted pregnancies we've talked about and the fact that they are surging. Mental health, I think we've talked about it. This is kind of the last slide, and we've been talking about economic growth being necessary for poverty alleviation. We've seen that the opposite is happening, and recovery is going to take much longer, right? Yeah, at least we can be sure that for the next 4 to 5 years, even if COVID was to end today, pickup will be slow and it will be painstaking, and we won't go back exactly to where we were before, okay? Then there's this issue about the middle class. And this is a very important issue. There's an article again in my blog I have written called increasing the false narratives that Africans have told themselves. And before 2000, we used to be called the failed continent, all those names. But after that, they started calling us the rising continent. And I know there are a lot of companies that made decisions to relocate to Africa because apparently of the youth bulge and the fact that people are going to be buying so much more. What they forgot to do is to question, do this surging population, do they have the buying capacity? Because a middle class is maintained by purchasing power. So that so how you would know we have a real middle class in Africa is in a crisis like this one of COVID-19. It should have been possible for people not to feel the strain, at least for the next 6 months. But as soon as the crisis struck, within 1 month, people were falling into the poverty category. And that tells you that we have a false narrative about this middle class issue. The second thing is and we found this and it's highlighted in the Factbook, is that even the definition we've been given by World Bank and Africa Development Bank is false. Usually $2 to $20 per day is poverty, is considered so poor in other parts of the country. But they redefined middle class as people who earn $2 to $20 per day. So, of course, with it is projected in Kenya at least that 75% of the people will lose their jobs. So that is a fallacy. We don't have a middle class, right? So, of course, that because the economic growth is maintained by demand and supply, okay? So that demand is going to go down by the fact that people don't have an income. So if it is predicated on these things, and so Agenda 2063 was predicated on Africa rising, what does that tell you about the vision we have painted for Africa Agenda 2063? It means it's predicated on a wrong narrative. Now, ICT is, of course, there are all these glamorous numbers about connectivity in Africa has really grown. It's between 0 in some countries to, and growing at 8,000, times or percent. But it looks like there are opportunities here. The only question we need to ask is whose opportunities are they? Like I said earlier, it is the big corporations that have the capacity to we are on this platform, whether it's Zoom or Google, whatever, it's not our platform. So these resources are going elsewhere, advert resources and everything. So what does that mean for Africa? Yeah, and what it seems to me is that based on that, I think we need to ask fundamental question about what are we doing about the inevitable change that is happening to us as individuals, as governments, as religious institutions, as universities, as a youth movement, because this is hosted by Africa Alliance for YMCAs. And then the question becomes, how do you manage that change? Do you adjust? Do you shift? What new opportunities are there? What transformations must be made? Because life will not remain the same again. What must we modify? What must be the transitions? And the reason for this presentation and for the work we did with YMCA is to tell us and to condition young people that we must think long-term and act today. Okay? If the rate of change on the outside there's this quote, exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. That was said by a gentleman that started General Electric, Jack Welch. Okay? Change is hard, but stagnation is fatal. And so as we make this discussion, I think I want us to have all those things in mind so that we are able to process this. We are able to process this information in a much more robust way. Thank you, guys. And thanks, Lloyd.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Now, I would also encourage participants, the attendees, if you have any questions, it would be excellent if you would raise them, and so that we can raise them to Dr. Katindi. Maybe just for the purpose of the first question I would have is, what is the address for your blog? You've mentioned it
Oh,
several
so
times.
many times. I'll post it here. I'm so
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah.
Please post
Yeah.
it. I see Pius would like to ask a question. Let me see if I can allow Pius to speak. Pius, I think you can, I have unmuted you. You can go ahead and ask.
Thank you very much, Doc. Am I clear?
Yes, you can
Yes.
go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Doc. It seems as if I was there, I was seeing you in present. The lecture was really nice, and it's really scary. And the last time we were was in Nairobi, or I think in South Africa with Lloyd, we are also discussing these scenario issues, and we never thought COVID was even going to break in. And now this is just one of the eventualities. And so even as we are projecting this, the scenarios, now we should also be thinking what other thing else might just pop in, which might distort the scenario not to hold. Because now we are assuming all things being equal, nothing is to happen, then these are the things that we should expect. But now we have even seen COVID has come in. And now we are talking about change. We have to think about the future and act now. What are we going to think about this future? Because now we can't clearly project the happenings that might happen. And two, we are really also so much, how do I say it? Like you're saying, now we are even using this Zoom platform, but we are not benefiting from it now. The whatsoever income we'll be generating is going somewhere else. How can we make sure we act on our own? Because now, even within this COVID, most of the instructions and the regulations are coming from those that have the power to be. And now, how can we act on our own to make sure we have our own power, we have our own resource, and we have, I don't know how to say, but we have our own strength to do things our own way. So just in case anything should happen again, then we don't have to rely so much on other economies. Because now, like we are talking about even donor funding, it's going to reduce. And how is that financial gap going to be covered? Especially for those institutions that are hugely donor reliant. So what are we to do to make sure we solve these problems that we are envisioning, even in the coming future?
Okay. Lloyd, do you want me to answer first, or do you want me to take a few?
Maybe we can take one more at least, if there's
Okay.
anyone else. Is there anyone else who has a question? Okay, Rukudzo, go ahead, Rukudzo. You can unmute.
Yeah, you know what? My apologies. I was actually a bit late, but just to add more or less to what Pius was saying, I think there has to be a way in which we strike a balance between, you know, being consumed with what we can create for ourselves, like inbuilt power to determine where we are going, and also allowing ourselves to be shaped by our realities around us. Because, for example, COVID is real, and you know things like this are going to continue to come even in future and stuff. There's going to be a lot of uncertainty because, you know, change is something which is constant. But I think now my question is, how do we strike a balance between making sure that we are compatible with changes, but at the very same time, those changes do not make us reactionary, if I'm to put it that way. Our actions are not determined by the changes. I don't know if that question is actually framed clearly.
Yes, it is.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So,
Doctor, go ahead.
yeah. So basically, let me first of all start by saying that, again, another article in my blog. Looks like I came here to sell my blog. There's an interesting article about how you manage turbulence. Okay. And, oh, yeah. Okay, Lavin is saying yes. Yeah, Lavin, go ahead and share with everybody the blog and the article. So basically, there's another article that talks about how we manage turbulence. And one of the things I caution there is we need not be too optimistic, because too optimistic then means you live in utopia. You're almost like, yeah, I'm in dreamland. I am refusing. that COVID is happening. Then there's someone else who is so pessimistic that, oh, what can I do? Let me just rest in my fate. And so what that person might tend to do is even, what can I say? Like resign to fate could mean drink yourself to death because there's nothing you can do about the situation and so forth. But the point is to, in this, and I know you ask how we strike a balance, is to acknowledge the reality and the full effect of the reality, but with the idea of saying, what opportunities must I find in this place to resolve the situation? So it's a proactive situation where you keep on looking for answers that will be able to help you, in a sense, shape the answers that you need. I'm not sure whether I've answered that clearly, but it is a personal decision. I'm trying to say that it's a personal decision. For the Kenyans who are in this meeting, once we were told the amounts of money donor money that has gotten lost in corruption that was supposed to be for COVID, a lot of people were so heartbroken that people would reach that level of almost being an animal, that you cannot have empathy on, and you can steal money made for a health issue. But the point is this: other people around you will disappoint you, but what is the personal decision you make? Because all of us are facing the crisis, but it depends on where you are, the decisions you made, and where you decide, where you make choices to actually get yourself to, let's say, get an intervention that will determine the difference between those who make it and those who don't make it. So it's mainly being more proactive than reactive. But what I find, and why this is an important question, is because a lot of us are proactive, but it's almost like you're putting your proactivity in the wrong place. You refuse to process the magnitude of the issue. And yet it is in the magnitude, understanding the magnitude of that issue, that you will actually understand. And then you see, once you've understood the magnitude of the issue, you are not shocked. And because shock makes you inactive, shock makes you have inertia. But it is in processing that information that gives you a clearer way forward. It removes the mist from being. And what scenarios tries to do is to shock you into the reality or the full extent of what a crisis does. It is not in any way meant to make you feel like it's a doom scenario and there's nothing you can do. Okay. Now the second question, I think, which was the first question, is about what other things will happen. In foresight thinking, we say that it doesn't matter the precision of the issue. Okay. So a lot of people come to me and tell me, oh, you know what? We did this scenario, but we did not predict that a COVID did not come. But if we go back to the scenarios we created, did we, for example, see the importance of technology in the future? Yes. Did we see, for example, the fact that the youth bulge issue and the unemployment issue is an urgent matter? Yes. Did we, for example, see a new colonialism, a new form of colonialism coming? Yes. The point we try to make is it's not about getting the issue precise. And I know as Africans, we are very mystical. You know, we will either go to our religion to get that opium of the mass, or we will go back to something like, what are they called in West Africa? Those people, okay, witch doctors and all. Although we don't call them witches, we call them, yeah. So, but we visit them so that we can get precise answers. In scenarios, we just need to know that, look, based on the information you have, life is much more complex than it used to be. The frequency of crisis is happening so much more. And once you process that, is to ask yourself, okay, how do I build a more resilient society? And you can actually get clues from the data we already have. Resilience will come, for example, when you're able to be more agile, okay? The resilience will come when you're able to adapt to change quickly. Resilience will come when you're able to see opportunity in crisis. And so that's the kind of preparedness you need. It is not the preparedness of understanding the actual issue that could happen. But the past can give you clues. Those crises that are going to happen next are either going to be of an economic nature, i.e., base it on the 2008 financial crisis. Economic nature also looking at the oil crisis, right? And these whole fluctuations around who owns what oil and who is determining the price of oil, right? Another crisis that you don't need to be told about is if these young people in Africa are not fed and adequately educated, there's going to be, and our governance is not staying, is not up to par with the changes that they need to make, and they keep tinkering with the future, there's going to be a crisis. And it's just like the racist issue. It has gone on in the US for so long that it's a no-brainer that at some point there was going to be a mass protest about Black Lives Matter. So to what extent can, for example, corruption, what will the tipping point of corruption with our governments look like, or unemployed young people look like? That's where the clues are. But you don't need the precision of it. It's to ask yourself, how do I survive these things? All right. Our debt is another one in our countries. That's a big one. Are we going to be sold off by the Chinese at some point, or what is going to happen? Right. And then now the other thing we have to understand is we then begin to have to ask ourselves, how is society evolving? And where are the systems of change happening? Now, when I was growing up, the individual used to be the center of it all, right? The individual in the sense that I need to be the best in my class. So competition was a big one, and the system of education is predicated on, let's say, competition. But when you look at how good progress is happening now, it is the people who collaborate that are making it big time. So the question becomes, how can I master the things where change and what I can call successful change is happening? How can I master the ropes of that? And how can I leverage on those opportunities to create opportunity for myself? So for example, if I'm a tech, right? What are the opportunities for collaborating to provide a solution for an issue in whichever country I live in? But also there are issues then around copyrights and those ownership issues. How then do I even protect myself from those IP issues and so forth? So it is to look to try and understand the systems of change. One of the things I tell young people is this thing about being self-employed is a big shot, because the kind of self-employment, unless you have an idea that is actually solving an actual problem in your country, and then again, it will not come overnight. You have to come to terms with the fact that success will come in the long term, not in the short term. Otherwise, you keep getting disgruntled. But it is to as young people, to learn how to build the capacity to survive in the 21st century. And I feel like that's where the crisis is, that we keep looking at other people, governments, to give us answers. They also don't have answers. Or donors to give us answers. They have their own problems in their countries. What can you do as a group of young people to provide the answers you need for yourselves, right? The financial gap. Who says we can't reimagine something different? And the problem, again, we normally have is to try and imagine that we have to work within the systems that have been created. Like, I'll give you an example of the money. It's an old example, but just for purposes of this presentation. Who would have imagined that there would be another way to bank your money except a banking hall, right? It took courageous young people to say, wait a minute, the phone is becoming a gadget of opportunity. It's becoming your calendar, your phone, all those things, right? In one. Can it also be your bank? And that is what is innovation, that you imagine a different system from the one that exists. And because the problems that Africa is facing cannot be solved with the existing system. So how do we innovate different systems that can work to resolve those issues? It's not as easy as it sounds, but the thing to educate ourselves, like I'm saying, is how do we understand how to successfully thrive in the 21st century and do it well? Okay, so those are my general answers to those two questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. For me, I think one of the things that I have really taken, I'm just looking at my notes, is asking myself whether big tech is the next frontier for colonization. But I wonder about African big tech. I know there's a lot of talk about Internet of Things. There's a lot of talk about, telemedicine, for example, as a solution. But I think if you go backwards from the conversation you had, there was a conversation about mobile growth and internet penetration. That's probably not very accurate, or we are seeing very different things when you look at this situation. So just as I invite another person with a question, my concern is around are we really prepared as Africa? What do you think? Do you see real opportunities, or are we talking about the middle class that really was not to be? Do we have that capacity?
I think there are real opportunities. Like there are numbers that were being told, Africa has a surge for the numbers. And it has a surge, yes, because we were at a very low place, right? So the numbers are not lying in as far as, if, for example, I came to, let's say, your estate, assume you're 100 people, and at the time before I started selling phones, only one person had a phone. If I sell 20 phones, right, it is a surge. Compared to a place like another estate, assume in another developed country, where there are these 100 people and 99 have phones. You see, it's not, so it's interpretation of data. The surge is there. But are we 100% covered? No. Are we seeing trends where the phone is becoming a much more important tool than a communication tool? That it actually might be your school, it might be your office, it might be, If you can answer yes to that question, and not everyone is covered, let's say these are 100 our people, only 20 now have. What makes you think that you cannot go back there and then, first of all, understand what is it that is the issue? First of all, obviously they need phones, because if they have children in the house, they are going to, I didn't need, for example, a second laptop, but I had to buy a laptop because my kids now, part of their interaction is with their schoolmates is to see each other through a laptop, right?
Yeah.
So the guy selling computers never had my money, and would never have had my money before COVID. But after COVID, they got more resources because of those opportunities. So the person selling mobile phones needs to understand what would be a functional phone, right, for the needs that an African needs, and at a cost that the African needs. If you can crack that code quickly. Quickly
is the word, yes.
Quickly is the word, because then the other people wait until what we call the early adopters have done their thing, cool at the money, and then, gotten the resources, and then now you come as a laggard and say there were no opportunities.
Yeah, sure.
If you can figure out those opportunities quickly, you're good to go. So things like, I look at where Africa is at, the issue of water is a big one. If you can begin thinking about how you can sustainably solve the water issue in the next 10 years, you're good to go in any urban area. You're in business. If you can maybe tap misty water, and we have that in our scenario.
We had that in the scenarios,
in the scenario, right? Because those are the opportunities of the future. For example, I'm so tired of this issue about electricity, because I am so sure that my gadget is inflated. There's no way, with the kind of things that go on in my house, we can consume that much electricity. And now I am this close to looking for an alternative that I don't have to spend that money. Now, I'm sure I'm not the only one. If we can get you thinking about that solution, that is a solution for the future. And anybody, for example, if you're an architect, why are you still building houses without solar wiring? Why are you still building houses that cannot be portable? Why are you still building houses that cannot, have some, recycling or environmentally efficient ways of processing, whether it's garbage, reusing water, and so forth? And so if you're not setting trends, you're also not, you're looking at the system that exists, which we have already determined that it fails. It has failed already. So we need alternative, but our problem is we lack the courage to start something different and something new.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. I think Pius had raised his hand up. Maybe as Pius, if you could just do a follow-up question. If anyone else would have a question, please also raise your hand. I'll pick you. Pius, make it 30 seconds this time round. You can unmute yourself and speak.
Okay. Thank you, Lloyd. I'm going to make it very short.
Thank
I
you.
hope I'm audible enough.
Yeah.
Yes, you are.
So, okay, thank you. I see this whole scenario stuff is like creating this pandemonium for us. It's like creating this fear because, yes.
It's like
because
creating
now,
pandemoniums and?
yeah, it's like creating fear for us. Like
Fear, okay.
Fear is the right word. Yeah, I don't think pandemonium is the right word. It's like creating fear. Yes, because now so much of troubles or so much of problems are being projected that we might face in the future with limited solutions. Example, we are looking at this technology issue. Now, there's a greater tendency that in the next 5-10 years to come, most of the world will be hinged on technology. But you look at Africa, which is like almost far behind in terms of technology, and you even look at our buying capacity, our buying ability. Now, during this COVID, almost everything was digitalized. You have to listen to media, you have to listen to radio. And how many people can readily afford these things? And even if people can afford them, how many of them have the facilities that can enable them use them? Because if we look at Africa, you look at Africa, and I'm not just talking about the urban areas, you look at the rural areas, many people don't even have the internet facility to harness these things. And many people cannot even use computers. But then we are fastly moving towards this technology age. So how are we going to solve that problem? Even when it means people will have to go to school to learn the skills, it is going to take long time. And I don't know if time is not going to catch up with us. And even in terms of innovation, only few people can really innovate. I don't know if that is how the human mind or that is how it is. But even when it comes to innovation, we don't have many people that can really think creatively to innovate. We still have the masses that can actually wait for people to innovate and then follow the trend. How are those masses going to survive? Because according to the scenarios, we are really moving at a faster trend. And what is the government also, or what should the government also do to make sure? Because now they are seeing these things and they have a role to play to make sure we are readily positioned for whatever change that the future may bring. So what is the role of the government as well?
Thank you, Pius. Thank you.
Lloyd, do you want to answer that question?
Yes, I can begin to answer.
Yeah.
I can begin, and maybe to say that instead of, maybe it's a mindset shift on our part, because when we look at the trends that we have and when we look at the scenarios, and I understand Pius' concern that this is a little bit of, it feels to him like a little bit of fear mongering. But I think I would look at it like this. These are opportunities that are being presented to us in broad daylight. And sometimes it's opportunities that come looking like problems. Because if it's a problem anyway, it's presenting itself as something you can solve. Now, I like the question that he asked about the innovativeness of the masses. I think the African mass, if I may put it like that, is very innovative. We have come up with very cool innovations on how we can survive situations like this. But also there's an opportunity to change our education systems to focus a lot of the innovativeness of our young people and of the youth. And that is when I start looking at the Agenda 2063, maybe that is the education component we need to start thinking about. How do we incorporate a more innovative curriculum in the long term? But also, how do governments harness innovativeness of its own people? You mentioned mobile money. Mobile money, actually, I've had someone criticize mobile money as an innovation of 20 years ago. This is actually something talked about that was talked about 20 years ago. But on the other hand, it's something that we are relying today on very much. So my answer to Pius's concern is, yes, it looks like it's fear. It looks like it's a conglomeration of many problems, but it's also a conglomeration of many areas for which we can intervene. So
Yeah.
how about if we look at the scenarios in terms of these are opportunities for us to intervene, and these are opportunities for us to think as the YMCA and as young people around solutions around these issues? That would be my immediate
Your
answer.
answer. I wanted to ask, I just wanted to hear what you have to say, because Pius, I have little children. One is 5, heading to 6 in November, although they think they're already 6. And another one just turned 4 and already is thinking she's 5, right? Now, when they're afraid of the dark, they close their eyes. Okay? But even if they close their eyes and they feel like that will protect them, look at my eyes, right? They did do this. Does that mean the darkness is gone? No.
In fact, it's increased because now there's a layer of darkness from the hand.
From their eyes. I think what scenarios tries to do is to point out the level of darkness, figuratively speaking, that we are in. But assume that you need to go. So there's a blackout, a sudden blackout. And so one person, the kids decide to do this. As their mom, do I stay there and do this? Or do I try and figure out how the house is layered, right? Where things are. And I sort of like try to walk in that darkness to go and look for a matchbox to light. What scenarios is trying to do is not to keep you in fear, is to get you out of the fear and to help you find your way to where the matchbox is, to light it so that the darkness may be sort of like absorbed by the light that is coming. That is the essence of scenarios. Because if you don't do anything about it, you're going to stay in that darkness and nothing will change as long as you're seated in that darkness, closing your eyes. Okay? The interesting thing about Africa is how we have processed innovation. We have felt like innovation is when I'm able to make a computer gadget. And that is not correct. If you think about people, so I do scenarios work. Am I an innovator when I realize that I can't hold physical meetings, but I can somehow try and make group work within a Zoom call? I'm innovating knowledge, right? So the question becomes, what is your definition of innovation? Today, I happened to listen to a clip about the history of vaccines in the world. And apparently, when there was smallpox, I think, in the US, there was an outbreak in the US. It is an African slave that told the white master, in Africa, where we came from, what used to happen when we have this kind of disasters is we would take the fluid from the person who is infected and put some of it within our veins, so that helps us sort of like build immunity. I'm not sure they used those exact words, so that they survive the crisis. And so in that whole pandemic, a certain doctor listened to that guy, and he actually tried in a small area, tried to do that. And when he did that, people survived. And that guy then went on and on to build the issue of vaccines as a way to survive pandemics. And eventually that's how they won over polio and they won over things, because it's an introduction of that particular pathogen in your system to be able to build immunity. Okay? So I'm backing up Lloyd's point that in Africa has been a source, or rather was a huge source. In fact, was the beginning of civilization. Roads were built in Africa before they were built elsewhere. Now that history is not told to us, and so we think that the West is more advanced than us. And so over the years, we have come to learn that we are second to other people. But the question is, why is it that white people not white people, forgive me for the race issue, but why is it that other people, foreigners, come to Africa and they cannot leave because of the amount of opportunities they see, right? It's because we have conditioned ourselves to see problems and not to see opportunities. And like Lloyd is saying, and actually another clip, I now don't know how to share these clips. Maybe I can send them to Lloyd on WhatsApp and then he can share them. So this guy was talking about the education system. As long as in Africa, we were taught to memorize how long the river Limpopo will be, and that's what is examined in the exam, rather than What can we do with River Limpopo to provide water, to irrigate, to, to actually deal with actual problems? We were taught how to memorize non-issues, and that is what is examined. And so kids spend endless hours memorizing those things so that they pass an exam. But nobody spends time memorizing, how can I just get a solution to this problem here? That is what is the difference. So innovation is not gadgets and this. It's looking at your society and asking yourself, because employment is actually meeting a need people's needs. So if I come here and find that maybe these people actually need a shade, and I find a way of building a shade for them using scrap material, I have actually become an innovator, right? And if I can turn that into an income that then comes to me, then I'm becoming an entrepreneur. Now, if I can make that business grow past the borders of my country, then I am becoming an investor. It is as simple as that. And the difference is, what is the mindset we have about what needs to be done?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Doctor. Is there any other question from anyone? Feel free to raise.
Oh,
I see
I
raised hand.
have an analogy.
Yes.
I have an analogy.
Yes.
And this points very much to Pius's issue. A guy, a shoe manufacturer, and I'm sure you've heard this story before, a shoe manufacturer sends a salesperson to this village of these people who don't wear shoes. That guy came and said, "Sir, we have no business in that country. No, in that place. No man wears shoes." Yeah. Because they manufacture shoes. Then the guy sent another sales agent and says, "Oh, my friend, we have work to do, because those people don't wear shoes. So we have work to make shoes for everybody." That's the difference. How you see it.
Yes. I guess I'll also encourage, before I ask Nana to speak, I'll also encourage, I think there are many of us who are dealing with the scenarios themselves and who are going to be maybe speaking about them in country. I'll also encourage them, once you start to speak to your audiences, it's all about the shoe wearer and the shoeless society, the shoeless society, and the shoemaker, not the shoe wearer. So are we going to be complaining that no one wears shoes here, so we have no job, or no one wears shoes here, so we have a lot of opportunity? So Nana, I think all the questions are coming from Salon, from Sierra Leone. So David, please go ahead. You can unmute yourself.
Thank you so much, Lord. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can, David. Hi,
okay.
David.
Hi, Kaitindi. How are you?
Very well. So good to hear your voice.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm listening from a distance. It's been an amazing opportunity to be part of the discussion also. I have listened a lot, and while I was listening, and while you making all those examples and those analogies, I was thinking about something that had to do with both what Katindi and Lloyd have said. I think the scenarios basically have to do with how do we create a mindset shift, or a mindset change within the minds of young people. Because when we look at the trends or the scenarios themselves, the trends that came out of the scenario, you would want to think about there were various issues. For example, Kaitindi, you made mention of self-employment, and this is actually, looking at entrepreneurship, this is actually a huge area where a lot of young people today within the continent are of the opinion that yes, they are self-employed, they are entrepreneurs, but then the question that this brings to mind is how have we become entrepreneurs? Are we actually helping boost some other economy, or are we actually looking from within to create this employment? Because if for example, I say I am an entrepreneur who creates or who makes bags out of locally, or out of where I have to redesign bags using fabrics. Are those fabrics actually coming from within the continent, or are they being brought in from some other places like China and the rest of it. So we also want to look at, again, if you take climate change, for example, you talked about innovation has to do with how do you basically provide, be it livelihood, how do you provide an income in a particular industry or particular sector where there is need. If we look for climate change, for example, there are a whole lot of opportunities, readily available opportunities that are there, which even though the economies are different from one country to another within the continent, but there are a whole lot of opportunities that are there within climate change. And if you look at how do we actually harness these resources, because the part of the major problem is, I believe in some other part of the continent, resources are available for young people to tap into whatever thing that they want to do. But how do we tap into resources that are not available? And also, how do we actually make use of these opportunities which are there? For example, I'll tell you, if you look at climate change, for example, now, I know within 5 years or even less, or already it's happening in some countries, with tougher regulations, policies being implemented about climate change and deforestation. This will lead to a whole new sector or a whole new industry where that will lead to innovation, where young people will start producing things, and this will happen locally. So how do we actually ensure, how are we going to be able to tap into resources that we already do not have? Because based on all the analogies, it has to do with the scenario, the analogy Lloyd gave about the shoe, the town or the village without a shoe, and how do we produce shoes for them? So how are we going to be able to tap into or ensure we're exposed to resources that will enable us begin to actually bring this innovation, to bring it into ideas, to ensure that they are working? How do we tap into that? Because burden in all of this discussion is largely on us as young people. So part of all of this, the scenarios basically have exposed the darkness within the continent and the areas for opportunities. And for those of us who are S2C ambassadors, those of us who were part of the scenarios, those of us who benefited, who are already previewed to this, then it's like the available opportunities for innovation is right in front of us with raw data. But now, knowing all what we know, how do we make use of this?
Okay.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Before you answer that, Katindi, there's also Victor from, Victor is also from Salon. I'll tell you today, it's a Sierra Leonean thing. And it's okay. I love Salon. Victor Bokari, please, you can unmute yourself. You can add to the question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hello to everybody. I hope I'm live.
Hi, Victor.
Yes, doctor. Long time.
And I know, right? I became doctor since the last time we met. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, even though, I joined the discussion very late due to unavoidable reasons, but then, I've really catch up to with the discussion, surely. Yeah, the issue of this innovation that Pius, David, and others are talking about here. Of course, the issue of innovation is really important because as Africans, for us to catch up with the trend, of being a global partner, in the world. Now, we are talking of our educational system, just like what Lloyd was saying. Our educational system, of which to me, having observed critically our educational system in Africa, the one that was introduced by the colonial masters. I look at it to be a kind of education system where we are only taught to implement, rather than to innovate, rather than to practicalize from the real source itself. From our own brain, we crack our brain and see how we can create things for ourselves. We are only taught, at least through our educational system, how you go to school, you learn, and you come from what you've already learned, you implement, rather than coming, you sitting by, or you using the knowledge you've acquired to really create, really innovate new things. So how are we going to really transform this archaic education system of Africa, in bringing on board the reality of innovation? In bringing on board the reality of innovation. And then also towards the thing of the entrepreneurship that David was talking about, and that guys have already lamented on. This thing of innovation. Yes, of course, just like what David was saying. Mostly, how can we innovate as Africans using our very African resources? Using very African resources, not like operating, I think, in this form of this appropriate technology, bringing on board the Western stuff and making use of also African stuff, putting them together to say, yes, I want to, innovate this particular thing. But how can we merge the African stuff plus the African stuff to create also, an innovation?
Okay.
Thank you, Victor. Sorry to interrupt you. I think we are really running out of time, and Doctor needs to go for another meeting. So I would, let me just ask one last person to speak, and then you can answer all the questions, if that's okay with you, Daktari. There's someone called Kabrang. I will just allow you to speak. You can unmute yourself and go ahead and ask. Please ask the question briefly. And one last thing, just tell us where you're from and ask the question briefly. We only have 5 more minutes in the call. Just go ahead. Yeah, you can unmute and ask. Kabrang? I think your microphone is on mute. Can you hear us? I have a feeling you're speaking into a muted microphone.
Okay, maybe they can type the question.
Okay, yeah, maybe you can type. I think we lost him.
The internet. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. So I was gonna tell David and Victor regarding the question on innovation and how we prefer other people's innovations rather than our own. Consistently, okay, so I'm a Christian, but I believe the Bible and other religious texts are very similar. They actually, the story of Moses the Lord asks Moses, what do you have in your hand? Remember in the lady that had very little to eat before, in Elijah's time, before they ran out, right? What did she have? And Elijah said, prepare for me the meal with what you have in your hand. So with what you have left. So I believe we are never asked to do things outside what we have, right? But the problem is, do we see what we have? And do we value what we have? So Moses said it is a stick, but the Lord saw more than a stick. He saw an element that can eat another snake. He saw, in fact, he saw a snake in it, right? He saw a staff for shepherding. He saw sort of like a powerful gadget that would divide a whole sea. You see, so the question becomes, how have we processed what we have? I'll give you a very, very interesting example. And it comes back to the mindset issue. Have you seen the latest fashion about jeans and all these things? It is torn jeans, right? And for the longest time, we could never wear such torn clothes because they symbolized poverty. Now, in fact, some of the ones that I'm tempted to look, Lloyd, you can look for one online and share your screen. But I mean, the level of care on those things, that is completely absurd. But because somebody somewhere has called that fashion, I will see young people in Africa wearing those clothes and calling them fashion, right? But if an African does that, and everyone will call them mad. So the question becomes, whose value do we value most? Is it our own? And then does that mean then there's a problem with how we see value, right? And then do we then need to redefine that and recondition ourselves to redefine things differently? So I will ask that question in light of even our traditional foods. So you want to spend money, and I am a culprit of that, buying pizza and fried chicken. And we have fufu, we have boiled bananas in Uganda and so forth. Do we value those things as things that, in fact, this is polite. Look for a worse one. This is polite. This is very polite.
Okay.
Yeah. Look for a very bad one that is actually on the streets of Paris, being sold as fashion, and it is a ridiculous amount of money. The point is very simple, that what is our mindset about what we value? Because these days I hear there are nude beaches, right? But when we see Africans walking in Turkana or in, our what we call uncivilized parts of our countries, we call them backward. But instead of valuing that as their culture and celebrating that their culture and elevating that as their culture, my point is, again, it goes back, yes, to the education system, but it then begins to point us to the issue of enculturating ourselves differently and re-educating ourselves differently, so that we begin to do things, embrace our indigenous knowledge. Now, how can we transform? Obviously, then, in this conversation, education seems to have been a big point, because of what do we need to do to recondition ourselves differently. And if you ask me, I went to do a PhD because I wanted to be a university lecturer, but I'm quickly seeing how that is already obsolete, and that I'm out of a job before I even start one. Because think about it. These days, if I'm training an engineer, they don't want to be in my classroom. Lloyd, this is polite. Look for one where top and bottom is so torn that you wonder how someone can buy something like that.
I think I'm very concerned about the jeans that you know. But okay.
Yeah, but the point I'm trying to make is there are already open universities, isn't it? There are already MOOC courses, what they call massive online courses. So that by the time I train an engineer, the reason why they cannot get a job is because they don't need all those engineering things. In fact, if anything, today things are being made like I can buy a bed and it comes with a fixer's manual. So it is me to train myself how to use a spanner to fix the bed myself, because it comes in parts, right? So what I need to be teaching that engineer is to produce an item like that and to write those manuals. I need also to introduce them into business courses and into entrepreneurship courses, meaning that the demarcations we've created in our education system should be completely abolished. So what young people are doing is they're saying going to university is a waste of my time. I'd rather take a massive online course on coding. I take a massive online course on engineering. I take another massive online course on how to write, how to communicate, because that combination is what will get me the skill set I need to survive in the 21st century. So that education system is changing. Now, what Foresight teaches you to do is to start understanding that there's already a shift that is happening and that I need to begin to align with that shift. So for me, as an aspiring university professor who's fired before I'm hired, what I need to start doing is to start creating online content. That is why I'm partnering with a global company to start providing Foresight knowledge, because that is one of the small MOOC courses that you will need to get you ahead, okay? And that I am more relevant doing that than being a university lecturer. And if you can begin to process, I'm not saying I am super, I have it all figured out. I'm learning. But you have to open your mind to learning that there are things already happening around us that are beginning to show us where the change is. And if you can be an early adopter, you will be able to be a winner.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you. That's excellent. And you've encouraged, I think one of the things I'm taking away from this conversation is that we need to have a session on innovation as part of the series, and how to build our own muscle, innovation muscle. I know we are out of time, but Rukudzo had actually raised a question in the Q&A, and he says, since learning things that shape our mindset involves unlearning too, how do we shorten the process? Since we already have crises that we are in and others that are being focused. So I guess there he's talking about the half-life. I think it's called half-life of nuclear operates in half-life. I think he's all talking about the half-life of learning. How do we quickly begin a process of learning and unlearning? Maybe as a way of conclusion, maybe you could deal with that, because I know you have another meeting that you need to attend.
Yeah, so it's very big issue. Again, just read the first 5 articles of the blog. Again, it's the issue of agility. The issue of how do you see, there are people who see change and they sit there moaning about that change, right? There are others who see the change and ask themselves, where is the opportunity in this? Examples of what I have been seeing. Somebody is paying they were gotten out of work, and rather than sit there mourning, they decided to go to the market with their nice car, get vegetables from the market, and stand outside, because people have been quarantined, stand outside gates trying to sell those vegetables. At the end of the day, that person is better than the person who sat in the house mourning that we are in quarantine and we are no longer working. My point is very simple. You shorten the process by learning quickly and adapting so quickly to what needs to be done. And what delays the process is we fear plunging in because you want to get the answer right before you get in. Learn as you go, because it's like a moving car. You will not turn that car unless the engine is on, and unless if you turn the engine on, you can turn the wheels, you can turn the what is called the
steering wheel.
The steering wheel. Can you imagine? That went out of my head.
Nice.
Yeah, but it's agility and the time taken to process, to think, to process that you need to change, and then the actual action of beginning to do something. Because you see, when you're already doing something, you better realize that, oh, I'm on the wrong path, but I have learned something there. Then that gives you a lesson to how else to turn the corner.
Yeah, thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you. We could go on like this for the rest of the evening, but I am sure that we would have to make some more time for that. There's just a comment as we close. There's a lot to be done. This is from Areogun Ololade I think he posted it on the Facebook. He says there's a lot to be done in Africa. We should do this kind of discussions on a regular basis. And I have good news for you. This kind of discussions will be done on a weekly basis. We will do this throughout the course of August, the remainder of August, all through to September. We will have various sessions. Our next sessions will be same time next week, and another one on the next day in French, same session. And we will we'll be addressing climate change. But just to let you know that yes, we will be doing this kind of sessions. Is good news. We will have, hopefully, Doctor, you can join us again, even as just as an attendee, if you or a co-panelist, we will have another session with you. We really enjoy having you on board. You are a member of the YMCA, whether you like it or not.
I'm trying to get. Yeah, and I am really trying to get you the picture I was trying to say about tattered clothes.
Oh, so yes, I found
you one. Will allow me to do it.
Is it this one?
That one. Can you imagine?
It's the one. Oh,
it's the one. God. These are clothes that are sold in a supermarket. And this person had the courage to imagine that if he tells people this is fashion, they will buy.
Yeah.
Tafakari. Think through it.
And they did buy. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Doctor. I don't want to keep you. Yeah, Douglas says, oh God, yes, it is true. That is what is happening. Thank you for your time, Douglas. Thank you. He says, let's adapt quickly, and we will indeed do that. I would like to let you go now for the next
Mhm.
meeting. And I will just let you know, we are
Thank
having
you.
7 countries having these conversations around the scenarios,
Okay.
led by our S2C ambassadors. And
Okay.
we are also going to be inviting some of our partners. So please feel free to join us for any of those sessions.
Awesome.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very, 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 very much. Please take good notes because I'd like to see the policy issues that come out of
Definitely.
this discussion. And thanks everyone. It's so good to, well, talk to you even if I didn't see your faces. Douglas, David, all of you. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, and have a nice afternoon.
Okay, yes, and I'll
Yeah.
let let Lloyd know when we start the classes in case there's anyone who wants to join a 3-month course. So we just meet once a week, and we are going to thoroughly try and just work with young people to get that mindset, a futures mindset, because I think it's a 21st century skill that any young person needs to be able to navigate the world as is right now.
Thank you very much.
Okay, good. Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone,
Bye-bye.
and goodbye.